Emotionally, it triggers 7 things very effectively: exhaustion with contradictory advice, suspicion of manipulation, nostalgia for simpler living, pride in common sense, protection of family, resentment toward modern packaging, and relief through simplicity. That combination is highly shareable because the viewer feels not only informed, but vindicated. Audience engagement is handled through direct address, tiny suspense cues, and identity reinforcement. The speaker keeps implying, "You are not foolish, the system is noisy. You can learn to see through it." That is very sticky psychologically because it flatters the viewer without sounding like flattery. To outperform it, the new script should keep the same strengths: clarity, certainty, emotional relief, practical guidance, but improve in 4 ways: stronger rhythmic variation, more modern relevance for 2026, more vivid household examples, and slightly more strategic comment bait. The result should feel more cinematic, more quotable, and more useful, while remaining fully original. Below is a fresh, ready-to-use script. Every year the food world finds a fresh way to make ordinary people feel behind. One month a food is called clean, the next month it is called dangerous. One expert says fear fat, another says fear carbs, then someone else tells you the real problem is seed oils, or fruit, or dairy, or salt, or breakfast, or eating after dark, or eating before noon. A person can spend half an hour standing in a grocery aisle trying to do the right thing and still walk out with a cart full of things that looked wise and turned out to be expensive nonsense. That is the trap. It is not just that people are busy. It is that modern food advice is built to wear people down until they stop trusting their own eyes. So let us clear the fog in the simplest way I know how. I am not here to sell you a miracle. I am not here to hand you a punishment plan disguised as discipline. And I am not here to tell you that one magic powder, one miracle berry, or one laboratory bar is going to save your health in 2026. If Dr. John has given you instructions for your own body, you follow Dr. John. If you have a condition, a treatment plan, or a history that changes what you can eat, that comes first. What I can give you is a practical way to shop without being fooled, and 9 foods that still deserve a place in an honest kitchen. Before we name a single one of them, I want to give you the rule that makes the rest almost unnecessary. Choose foods that still look like they came from somewhere living. A bowl of oats looks like grain. Eggs still look like eggs. Yogurt, if it is plain, still behaves like food your grandparents would recognize. Lentils look like lentils. Sardines look like fish. A walnut looks exactly like a walnut and makes no speeches on the label. But the moment a product needs 10 claims on the front to convince you it belongs in your body, you should slow down. Real nourishment usually arrives with less marketing than manipulation does. That one rule does not answer every question, but it answers most of them. It keeps you from wandering through the store like a person being hustled. It brings your attention back to what the food actually is, not what the package says it represents. And in 2026, when every aisle has learned to talk like a wellness influencer, that matters more than ever. Now let us go through the 9 foods I would gladly keep buying, not because they are fashionable, but because they are useful, satisfying, and hard for clever marketing to improve upon. The first is eggs. The egg has spent years being blamed, defended, attacked, redeemed, and dragged through more headlines than it ever deserved. Meanwhile, it has gone on being what it always was, one of the most practical foods in the store. High in protein, easy to cook, flexible, filling, and usually affordable, eggs solve problems. They help the person who needs breakfast that does not crash an hour later. They help the parent who has to put dinner together quickly. They help the student, the worker, the older person living alone, and nearly anyone trying to eat something real before reaching for packaged snacks. And notice something important here. The power of the egg is not mystery. Nobody needs a futuristic explanation to understand it. You can boil it, scramble it, fry it, fold it into rice, drop it over vegetables, or build a whole meal around it with almost no waste. If you can buy eggs from birds raised better, wonderful. If your budget only reaches standard eggs this week, they are still eggs. Do not let perfection talk you out of practicality. That is one of the oldest tricks in the health marketplace, to make the good seem worthless because it is not ideal. The second food is plain yogurt, and I mean plain, not dessert wearing gym clothes. Not a candy cup with probiotic language on the lid. Plain yogurt is one of the few packaged foods that still has the decency to be simple when you buy the right kind. It offers protein, useful cultures, and a kind of versatility that fashionable health products can only pretend to have. You can eat it with fruit, stir it into oats, use it in sauces, add herbs, add cucumber, add spices, use it in marinades, or pair it with nuts for a snack that actually steadies you. The danger with yogurt is the same danger you will see across the whole store. The industry knows a good base product when it sees one, and it knows people want convenience. So it loads sugar into it, paints the cup with words like light, fit, active, or immunity, and sells dessert at breakfast prices. Turn the container around. If the ingredient list reads like a committee meeting, put it back. If it is cultured dairy and a few ordinary additions, now we are talking. The third food is oats. Oats are not glamorous, and that is part of their strength. They do not need a mascot, a trend cycle, or a celebrity physician to justify their existence. They are steady. They fill the stomach without putting on a circus. They work for breakfast, for baking, for thickening, for stretching a meal, and for getting a person through the morning without living on coffee and panic. That matters. There are millions of people who do not need a revolutionary breakfast. They need one that keeps them sane. But oats teach an important lesson. There is a difference between a humble staple and a highly engineered oat-shaped product. The closer you keep it to actual oats, the better your odds. Plain rolled oats, steel-cut oats, even simple quick oats can be excellent. What gets foolish is when the grain becomes a delivery system for syrups, flavor dust, colored bits, and promises. At that point, you are no longer buying oats, you are buying a costume. The fourth food is beans and lentils, and I am putting them together because they belong together in the mind of any practical shopper. If you ask me which foods are still underrated in a world obsessed with expensive health hacks, this pair sits near the top. Beans and lentils are satisfying, versatile, budget-friendly, rich in fiber, and capable of carrying flavor from nearly any cuisine on earth. They belong in soups, stews, salads, bowls, curries, wraps, skillets, and side dishes. They can stretch meat. They can replace meat in some meals. They can rescue a week when money is tight without making dinner feel bleak. They also do something psychologically useful. They make a kitchen feel grounded. A pantry with beans, lentils, oats, eggs, and a few fresh basics does not feel trendy, it feels secure. That is an underrated pleasure in an unstable culture. When people are anxious, they often buy solutions. Real food often works better when you buy foundations. The fifth food is berries, fresh or frozen. Berries have something rare in the food world. They still have a healthy reputation and often deserve it. They bring color, flavor, fiber, and a sweetness that feels like food rather than chemistry. They can go into yogurt, oats, smoothies, cottage cheese, or simply a bowl. And frozen berries deserve more respect than they get. A freezer full of fruit is not a sign you failed to buy fresh. It is often a sign you are smart enough to keep good options on hand. This matters because many people lose the nutrition game in the gap between intention and convenience. They buy fresh produce with noble feelings, forget it in the drawer, and then order something fried because the evening got away from them. Frozen berries solve part of that problem. They wait for you without scolding you. That is a better friend than most diet plans. The sixth food is leafy greens, but let me say this in a sane way. I am not telling you to become a person who chews dry kale and calls it discipline. I am saying greens still deserve their place because they make meals better when used like normal food. Spinach and eggs. Arugula next to roasted potatoes, cabbage in a skillet, lettuce under grilled meat, bok choy in broth. Greens do not have to be a personality. They have to be present often enough to matter. One reason people give up on healthy eating is that they turn every good food into a moral exam. Greens are not impressive because they are miserable. They are impressive because they are adaptable. Buy the ones you will actually use. If a giant box of spring mix turns to swamp in your fridge every week, stop buying fantasies. Buy cabbage, buy spinach, buy romaine. Buy what your real life can support. The seventh food is nuts, especially walnuts, almonds, pistachios, and whichever plain nuts you can keep around without turning them into salted candy. Nuts are useful because they travel well, pair well, and rescue hunger before hunger makes stupid decisions. That may sound trivial, but it is not. A surprising amount of poor eating begins not with appetite, but with delay. A person gets too hungry, too tired, too rushed, and suddenly the brightest package in the room starts sounding reasonable. A handful of nuts is not a halo. It is not a detox. It is not a miracle. It is simply one of the few convenience foods that can still be itself. That matters in 2026 because convenience has become one of the main ways people get fooled. If something is fast and real at the same time, that is worth noticing. The eighth food is oily fish, especially sardines, salmon, mackerel, or trout, depending on what is available and what you can afford. Now, I know some people stop listening the moment sardines are mentioned, but listen anyway. There are foods that have excellent marketing, And then there are foods that quietly do the job. Oily fish is in the second group. It provides protein, satisfying richness, and valuable fats without needing to pretend it is candy, cereal, or pudding. Canned fish in particular deserves a comeback because it is practical, shelf-stable, and less precious than people imagine. Here again, simple choices usually win. Fish that still taste like fish, packed plainly, is easier to trust than products designed to imitate seafood while sounding like a biotech startup. And if you do not love fish on its own, pair it intelligently. Mustard, lemon, herbs, potatoes, rice, salads, toast, beans. Real food gets easier when you stop demanding that every ingredient entertain you like a commercial. Dia miana commercial. The ninth food is extra virgin olive oil. Not because it is magical, and not because I need another argument about fats, but because it remains one of the most sensible ways to add flavor and satisfaction to ordinary meals. Vegetables become easier to eat when they are roasted with it. Salads become meals when dressed with it. Beans improve with it. Fish improves with it. Bread in moderation improves with it. A kitchen without some useful fat is a kitchen that forces people back toward processed cravings because the food never quite lands. And now step back and notice what these 9 foods have in common. Eggs, plain yogurt, oats, beans and lentils, berries, leafy greens, nuts, oily fish, olive oil. None of them require a costume. None of them need to bully you into believing. None of them depend on the latest food panic to justify their place. They are not perfect, because no single food is, but they are reliable, and reliability is worth more than hype when people are trying to eat well for years, not for 6 dramatic days. This is where many people get lost, so let me say something plainly. The goal is not to build a museum of virtuous ingredients. The goal is to make eating well easier than eating badly. That is the real contest. If healthy food only works in a perfect week, then it does not really work. It has to survive a tired Tuesday, a late paycheck, a crowded kitchen, a child who is fussy, a fridge that is half empty, and a mind that has already made 200 decisions that day. That is why I distrust so much of what passes for modern health advice. It treats people like laboratory conditions instead of human beings. It imagines that everybody has unlimited time, perfect digestion, money for specialty products, and the desire to spend half the day reading labels under bright lights. But ordinary people do not live that way. Ordinary people need food that makes sense when life is inconvenient. The 9 I gave you do. Now I want to talk about the emotional side of shopping, because food decisions are rarely about nutrition alone. A person walks into a store carrying stress, habit, memory, and hope. There is the hope that this week will be different, the hope that dinner will be calmer, the hope that energy will be better, the hope that the body will cooperate, and the market understands that hope very well. That is why so many products are sold not as food but as redemption. They promise a better self in a brighter package. Be careful with that promise. Once food becomes a moral performance, it becomes easy to manipulate you. Then breakfast is no longer breakfast. It becomes proof you are disciplined. Yogurt is no longer yogurt. It becomes proof you are informed. A snack is no longer a snack. It becomes evidence about whether you are failing. That is a miserable way to live, and it often makes people swing between strictness and collapse. Better to build a way of eating that asks less drama from you. One of the most liberating shifts a person can make is this. Stop asking whether a food feels impressive, and start asking whether it is useful. Useful foods come home often. Useful foods combine with other foods. Useful foods still make sense when that announce their virtue before you even touch them. The package is doing too much talking because the product cannot stand quietly on its own. When you understand that, you stop feeling personally foolish for being confused. The confusion was built. It was engineered by incentives, by branding, by convenience, by selective half-truths, and by the endless human hunger for shortcuts. Once you see that, you become calmer. And once you become calmer, you shop better. So what should a sane person actually do after hearing all this? Start small. Do not rebuild your entire pantry by sunset. On your next trip, pick 3 of these foods and bring them home in forms you will truly use. Maybe eggs, oats, and berries. Maybe yogurt, nuts, and olive oil. Maybe lentils, greens, and canned fish. Then ask one practical question. What simple meals can these support this week? Not fantasy meals, real meals. You could cook oats in the morning and stir in yogurt and berries. You could boil eggs and keep them ready. You could toss lentils with olive oil, greens, and a piece of fish. You could make a quick bowl with beans, cabbage, eggs, and leftover rice. You could keep nuts within reach so the afternoon does not end in vending machine regret. None of that is glamorous. That is exactly why it works. The people who consistently eat well are often not the people doing the most complicated things. They are the people who quietly reduce friction. They keep sensible foods visible. They keep a few staples in stock. They know 2 or 3 meals they can make half asleep. They do not demand novelty from every dinner. They do not turn every craving into a moral referendum. And because of that, they end up eating better over time than people chasing permanent reinvention. In 2026, that may be the healthiest rebellion left, to become harder to impress, harder to frighten, harder to manipulate with labels, trends, and food theater. The market wants you dazzled or ashamed because both states make you easier to sell to. Clarity interrupts the sale, so keep the standards simple. Favor foods with a recognizable origin. Favor ingredients that can join other ingredients without theatrical help. Favor meals that satisfy you enough to end the negotiation. Favor patterns you can repeat next month, not just next Monday. And when a product shouts its goodness at you from the front of the package, remember that truly useful food rarely needs to audition. If you want one final test, try this. Imagine setting the food on a table without its branding. Without the colors, the promises, the certification badges, the dramatic fonts, what remains? Would it still make sense as something to eat, something to cook, something to serve a family, something to trust? If the answer is yes, you may be looking at food. If the answer is no, you may be looking at a sales strategy. That is why I still believe these 9 foods deserve their place. Not because they are exotic, not because they are clean in some fashionable, self-congratulatory sense, not because they separate the pure from the fallen. They deserve their place because they continue to help ordinary people build meals that are steadier, calmer, and more nourishing than the alternatives screaming for attention nearby. And if that sounds almost too simple, good. Eating well should become simpler once you understand the game being played around you. Not effortless, not perfect, not identical for everybody, but simpler, clearer, more grounded, less vulnerable to every new panic and every polished promise. So the next time you enter the store, do not go in like a defendant on trial. Go in like a person with standards. Look for food that can speak for itself. Bring home the basics that keep proving their value. Let other people chase miracles in wrappers. You build a kitchen that still works when the trend changes, when the headlines flip, and when real life shows up hungry. That is the point, not food fear, not purity, not performance, just a basket full of things with a decent chance of helping you feel fed, steady, and less easily fooled. In a noisy year, that is worth a great deal. And because people always ask what this looks like in a real household, let me make it even more concrete. A good food list is only useful if it survives contact with ordinary days, so picture a week that is not especially organized. Monday starts fast. Tuesday runs late, Wednesday includes leftovers, Thursday someone is tired and tempted to order whatever can arrive in 20 minutes. Friday has that dangerous mood where people tell themselves they have earned chaos. The weekend is meant to be restful but often becomes irregular. If your so-called healthy plan cannot live through that week, then it is not a plan, it is a performance with good lighting. These 9 foods can live through that week. Eggs can become breakfast, lunch, or dinner with almost no warning. Yogurt can work sweet or savory. Oats can become a hot breakfast, overnight oats, or a binder for simple baking. Beans and lentils can carry soup, bulk out a salad, or turn scraps into dinner. Berries can save a breakfast from boredom. Greens can disappear into soups, omelets, stir-fries, and sandwiches without asking for applause. Nuts can sit in a bag, a desk drawer, or a glove compartment and keep a bad decision from becoming a worse one. Fish can come from the freezer, the fridge, or a can. Olive oil can make plain ingredients taste like somebody cared. That is what people should be looking for more often. Foods that cooperate, not foods that demand ideal conditions, not foods that need 7 supporting products to become edible, not foods that collapse the moment you are busy. The more cooperative your food is, the less often you will need to rely on willpower. And the less you rely on willpower, the more consistent you become without feeling as though every meal is an exam. This is also why the most effective healthy kitchens are usually a little boring from the outside. Not dead, not joyless, just stable. Open the cupboards and you see things that can become meals, not just things that made sense in a moment of retail excitement. Open the fridge and you see ingredients that know one another. You see leftovers with a future. You see a bag of greens that can meet eggs. You see yogurt that can meet berries. You see beans that can meet olive oil, garlic, lemon, and whatever else is nearby. Real kitchens are not built from inspiration alone. They are built from compatibility. A lot of people never hear food discussed this way because the internet rewards novelty over steadiness. Novelty is easier to package. Steadiness sounds old, and old rarely goes viral on its own. But in real life, old often works. In real life, the person who repeats a handful of solid meals usually does better than the person who reinvents breakfast every 3 days and calls that optimization. You do not need your food to be endlessly entertaining. You need it to stop betraying you at 3 in the afternoon. There is another psychological trick worth noticing. Many highly processed products are built to seem easier than they really are. They promise simplicity but create appetite without satisfaction. You eat them and feel as though you consumed something, yet the body and mind both keep negotiating. That is not an accident. A food that is easy to overeat is profitable. A food that makes you genuinely feel finished can actually end the transaction. That is good for you and less exciting for the business model. The foods I listed tend to lean in the other direction. They may not sparkle on a billboard, but they do something more valuable. They bring a meal to a close. Oats can settle a morning. Eggs can settle an appetite. Lentils can settle a dinner. Yogurt with berries and nuts can settle that restless feeling that sends people wandering through the kitchen at night, opening cupboards they are not even hungry for. Satisfaction is one of the most underrated forms of nutritional wisdom because a satisfying meal protects the next decision too. And this is where people who chase constant restriction often get themselves into trouble. They build meals around what looks the most virtuous in a photograph instead of what will actually hold them. Then, 2 hours later, they are bargaining with a pastry, a drive-through, or a family-size bag of whatever was on sale. They call that lack of discipline. Often it is simply poor design. If you keep making weak meals, you will keep needing heroic restraint. Better to design stronger meals. A stronger meal is not necessarily a larger meal. It is a meal with enough substance to calm the body and enough flavor to calm the mind. Eggs with greens and potatoes can do that. Yogurt with oats, berries, and nuts can do that. Beans with olive oil, herbs, and fish can do that. Lentil soup with bread and salad can do that. When people feel genuinely fed, health advice suddenly becomes much easier to follow because it no longer feels like punishment. I also want to speak to the person who has been shamed by food culture so many times that even a simple grocery list feels like accusation. Maybe you have tried strict plans before. Maybe you have thrown out half your pantry in a burst of motivation. Maybe you have spent too much money on foods you did not enjoy because somebody promised they were the answer. Maybe you are tired of beginning over. If that is you, then hear me clearly. Progress in eating well often looks less like a revolution and more like a return. A return to foods with names your family recognizes. A return to meals that can be cooked without a manifesto. A return to enoughness. There is dignity in enoughness. Enough protein, enough fiber, enough color, enough satisfaction, enough simplicity that dinner does not become a debate club. The market rarely celebrates enoughness because enough people stop buying drama. But for the person actually trying to live well, enoughness is freedom. And because this subject keeps getting louder, let me say one thing about 2026. Some trends will help people. Others will simply rename old wisdom, add a glossy label, and charge 3 times the price. You will keep seeing foods chopped, concentrated, powdered, whipped, fortified, stripped, flavored, and rebranded as though civilization finally discovered what your grandparents already had in a bowl. Try not to be too impressed.